Good evening. Thank you everyone for coming. Today is Tuesday, March 5th. I'd like to call this meeting of the Board of Finance to order. Again, appreciate everybody being here tonight. We have a pretty short agenda and just two topics. Well, the agenda's short. It depends on how long our participants want to carry on with those topics.
Point well taken.
Indeed. Our topics tonight are to receive the duly approved budgets for both the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Education, and we have the chairs of both those boards with us tonight, in addition to several other members of those boards. So again, thank you for coming. Mrs. Stevenson, I believe you wanted to go last this evening, so I will hand it over to the Board of Education.
Sure. Do you want me on the table or go to you? Whatever's better for
We're good either way, whichever is best for you.
Channel 79.
Yeah,
Right.
actually, if there's a mic, in terms of mics, that might be better if you're up there.
was all right. Thank you, Mr. Brown. I'm not doing this purposefully. I'm sorry, everyone back there, so y'all can see it.
I'm good.
All right. Let Mr. Feeney get ready. You're giving away all my surprises early, Mr. Feeney. Okay. Thank you. We are happy to present to you the 2019-2020 adopted budget for the Board of Education. We'll just run through quickly our philosophy, which has not changed in previous years. First, that we support children. We always look to maintain the integrity of our programs and make sure they are sound for students, and or if there need to be altercations, we do that, and you will see that in this budget. Alterations, not altercations, excuse me. Support our district initiatives as laid out in our goals and initiatives, which are agreed upon in July, and certainly that we are fiscally responsible to the taxpayers. This year's budget represents a 2.61 increase over last year, so the Board of Education budget will be $100,687,103. There is a $2,564,837 increase year over year. And that, again, is based off of a zero-based budgeting program each year that we go through with all of our departments. To understand our budget and the contractual obligations therein, 92% of the budget is based on contractual obligations: personnel, health, student obligations, and utilities. And I'm sure as we have our work sessions, we will have discussions on what's exactly inside of each of those buckets. But as you see, there's not a ton of flexibility within those, and it makes up the bulk of the dollars we bring before you. Specific to this year we are proposing a net 3.62 increase. This slide will break down for you where those increases are. We have decreases in staff and increases of staff. The major driver of the increases is the addition of a psychologist at the elementary school levels to those buildings. We've had much discussion at the board level. I imagine there'll be questions at the Board of Finance level and probably at the RTM level. And as those come, we're happy to answer them. The board feels that it went through a good, strong process, understanding the needs, understanding what we were taking on, and coming forward with that proposal. But I look forward to discussing it all with you more. We have an increase projected in revenue of about $200,000. The largest increase that this revenue increase is attributed to is the excess cost increase. We have at this point pushed our reimbursement rate up to 73%, which is fairly aggressive of us. In the past, we have budgeted between 68 and 72%. We have done that with a bit of a shift at looking at the year over year rather than kind of a holistic, let's stay within a range. What I would flag to the Board of Finance is that we feel comfortable doing this year. However, what we are projecting going forward is increased identification rates, but children underneath the threshold that they would be available to the excess cost reimbursement program. So I think that while this year we feel comfortable being at 73%, if we were to come back to you next year with a more conservative percentage, I just want to flag it now that we're really looking at what is our submission, what can we do this year, because we do know it affects the taxpayer, but there will be maybe more variability in the swings of percentage of reimbursements than you've seen in the past. So I'm happy to answer questions on excess costs if we have them at that point. Some noteworthy highlights. We have a continued rollout of grades 5 through 9 of our one-to-one initiative. At this point, this will be a static cost. We are no longer purchasing to onboard. We are purchasing to maintain. So as you look at your technology budget, that should give you a snapshot of where we'll be. There, we've listed some curriculum and instruction highlights. We are very proud of them. We're very proud of some of the way that we've been able to develop curriculum in Darien that is attracting the attention of even other districts who are interested in looking at our district for their own use and what that might do for us. But we have a great curriculum team. They have put in a lot of hours. So if you have questions on them, I'm happy to answer them. But we've noted some of the great initiatives there. Contracts and union contracts. You'll see here our nurses settled out at a 2%, as did paraprofessionals and secretaries. Due to expire, we have our cafeteria workers this year. Teachers and those negotiations will open up this summer, 2020. Custodial maintenance is 2019, and administrators are 2021. To get a snapshot of where we are with teachers, they're in the last year of their contract, and they're at a 3.4% step increase. So the fact that we're presenting a 2.61 budget can help show some of the efficiencies we're finding within that step increase. And we will look to renegotiate that contract beginning this summer. We are going to get to, I know, the Board of Finance's favorite slide of cost per pupil. So with that in mind, we wanted to just give some snapshots of what we are doing with that money. For example, we've got 9 semifinalists and 21 letters of commendation for our National Merit Program. We have 4 U.S. Presidential Scholar candidates, 3 this year, 3 from last year. We can go through all these, but we all know that we have a lot of success in sports, including 4 interscholastic athletic conference championships, and we have seen great returns on both our SAT and our ACT scoring. And that's some of the ways that we have been investing the dollars in our students for their own outcomes. I got a double slide there. We've also had some kind of, I'd say, less just statistical testing successes in terms of our Quiz Bowl has come in 3rd nationally. We have 53 authentic science research students that participated in the Southern Connecticut Science and Engineering Fair. 13 students earned top prizes. And we have instituted the Digital Portfolio Day down at the middle school, which is a precursor to our capstone project, so that all students will have a robust portfolio that they can show and understand by the time they get to 8th grade and put it all together and share with both the community and their parents. So, which leads us to our cost per pupil. And cost per pupil is becoming increasingly important as we look at some of the ways the state is deciding things. But where we are right now is Darien is about $21,000 per pupil. Understand that this is a broad category. When we do cost per pupil, it is a simple calculation, your budget versus your enrollment. So if we have increased transportation, like we did this year, our cost per pupil goes up. That is not affecting education, but it is, it's part of what has to be considered in our cost per pupil. So if you really want to understand what's going to the students, we need to break that down a little bit more. But in general, as some of these conversations go on at the state level, the cost per pupil will be a factor. So I do think the Board of Finance should be aware of what it is at currently. And you have kind of where we've tracked on red and the DERG average in blue. Our 6-year budget history over the last 3 years is a 2.37% average increase. If you go back to the 3 years before that, it was 4.09%. We are working hard to make sure we deliver predictable budgets that are sustainable. The rate of inflation is just under 2% right now. We'll see how long that will continue, but we feel that we are giving budgets year over year that are predictable, that keep cost savings in mind, and we try to do that as much as we can. And I think the last 3 years have been probably a more accurate depiction of doing that based on some of the past. If you go further back, we had some past issues which we've all discussed, which drove budgets even higher. Lastly, as a snapshot, and I think this also is to drive home that year over year we're trying to bring in predictable budgets and and minimize costs where we can. These are the surrounding budget increases this year. Fairfield 5%, Weston 3.9%, Ridgefield 3.6%, New Canaan, Westport are around our percentages at 2%, and Wilton at a 1.35%. And with that, I will take any questions you might have.
Any questions?
Tara, you mentioned student obligations. What do those entail?
So student obligations could be IEP contractual costs that once those IEPs are written, we really do not have the right to alter. So we put those in there because they're not a traditional fixed cost, but I do think it's important to understand that once they are contractual obligations and we cannot violate them. So in terms of our, let's say, ingenuity in how we manage our budget, those are static costs.
So IEPs is the only thing in that category?
IEPs, 504s would be in there. Okay.
A couple questions from me. The superintendent's budget was up 3%, and the Board of Education obviously pared that back a bit to get to 2.6%. Were there any highlights from those changes from 3 to 2.6% that you'd care to emphasize or talk about?
Sure. We made a decision to bring some legal services in that were currently outsourced that we felt that we could bring in-house and manage well. Our legal costs are certainly higher than we would like, and so as much as we can bring that in-house, I talked with our attorneys to see if they felt it wise, and while they are the ones getting billed out, they understood that we wanted to bring it in-house and thought it was a reasonable cost to do. The board discussed it, so that's one area where we made, I'd say, a rather significant cut, and we will use a current employee we have now to do some of those services. We were more aggressive on excess cost, pushing it up to the 73%. Okay. We did look at some other areas in the budget. Our turnover, which is something we look at every year, I think we have probably pushed that as much as we can. So our turnover rate, we pushed up a bit. I'd say those are probably
which then reduces faculty costs because you're bringing in cheaper staff, or whatever.
Well, the idea is when you budget and you look at your rate, you have to leave some room in that turnover rate. And so what we did, we were far more conservative than we have been in the past. Really what we are looking at is if you have 92% of your budget that is fairly fixed, for lack of a better term, we still need to make sure we're providing and keeping up with innovative education for kids. So anywhere that did not directly affect the educational needs of children, we really looked to pull back on. And I think that we've done it. And I think that we should really be proud that what we really did is hold kind of those non-educational fees as close as we could.
Okay. On the psychologists, there's a psychologist now that will be placed in every elementary school, or just a couple? Could you highlight sort of the dimension of that decision?
So we have a psychologist in each of our elementary schools now.
Okay.
And what the board, I think it's fair to say, struggled with in the beginning is, why do we need another one? We have a psychologist, what's going on? And what we really heard from our staff is that those psychologists' day, and we kind of walked through the day in the life of a psychologist, is at this point really dealt with the contractual obligations that they need to provide to students. And we were finding a whole other group of students that were looking for services and in need of services that the psychologist was not able to because of time in the day. And so the question began, and I think fair questions came from the board table. Well, what does that mean? Who needs a psychologist in school? It's very different, I think, from when I went to school where, reading, writing, arithmetic are what schools provide. So the answer is really the idea under the state constitution and educational law is that we need to meet the students where they are when they show up at our doorsteps each day. And we were finding students that needed a psychologist to be able to access their learning. It dovetails with state statute that there needs to be social and emotional learning and support in schools. That's also a change in recent years. And so in some ways this is compliance with that as well. But when we walked through it, we were finding that in order for the current psychologists to meet their contractual needs, we couldn't pull them out for students in crisis because then they weren't meeting their contractual needs. So we do feel that we need another staff member. We did look at sharing a psychologist between buildings. And we did look at models of an old model we had of having a psychologist housed at central office and then kind of deploying them when needed. At the end of the day, when the board looked at all the options, the only one that really served students in the way that we were hearing, including, quite frankly, instances of, and I'd just like to be sensitive around it, but elementary students in crisis that went anywhere from being able to enter a school building to being suicidal. We really felt that we really needed to meet those needs and certainly not create anything afterwards where we said, oh, I wish we had done it differently and better.
So you ended up with 5 additional psychologists, one for
No,
each
the
school, or
additional
what?
increases 4 because we already had one housed at central office that we were deploying kind of for these crisis situations, and even that wasn't enough. So it's 4 FTE.
Okay. Is there any sense that you'd need more at some point, and that this was an interim step, or was this something that felt like a complete solution?
So
to
the
that?
board asked that question when we looked at the responsibility that these psychologists have. Would we be coming back in a year asking for more? What we heard from the administration that they thought that 2 would be sufficient to meet the needs of our children based on the population that we currently have in our schools, and that there would not be necessarily anytime soon a request for additional psychologists at the elementary schools.
And is the administrative infrastructure to support them, executive assistants, even equipment, is all that adequate and in place, or does
Yes,
that have to
we
be
heard that
supplemented as well?
We heard that the costs were around hiring them, but we did not anticipate needing to hire secretaries or other support staff for them to be able to do their job. It really was about servicing students and not having the professional available to the student in need, more than sort of a back office kind of, paperwork need.
Okay. Just 2 more questions for me. You didn't talk any tonight about enrollment projections. I wonder if you had any comments on that, either in terms of where that stands for the coming year or the next few years out, in terms of changes in projections that we've seen recently, which I would characterize as flattish, and whether there's any sense that any of that is going to change in the near term in terms of your forecast.
So we did order an enrollment study, Malone and McBroom, and I'm happy to share it with the board. It was fairly comprehensive, although at the time that it came to us, it didn't take into consideration 2 projects that were later approved, and I do think the projects going on in town are probably important. We do see flattish for a while with a slight dip and then an incline again. I'm happy to share the report with the board.
Sorry, when did that come out?
This fall, I think in November they issued it. November. Yeah. We felt that it was time to update it. It also dovetailed with the building committee on Ox Ridge. For part of what they need to do to go forward to show the latest enrollment projection. So I can share that with the whole board, and you can have kind of a comprehensive sense of where we're going. In this budget, we do have a fair number of sections that could break. They're right on the line, and we do always see over the summer movement. It tends to be movement that tips us over rather than pulls us back, with families tending to move in the spring and enroll in the summer. But we have a fair number of sections. I think there are 5 that look like they're on the tipping point.
Okay. Last question for me. At our last meeting, our audit committee just had a discussion of the town's audit, which we had been in the process of working on for a while. And a question that came up in that discussion was around the procedures that had been outlined that should be followed with regard to the management and oversight of special education related data. And that would be providers, time spent, costs, all of that. And the purpose of that oversight, of course, is then to get to the reporting that's done to the state to file for these excess cost reimbursements. And so around the time of Sue Gamm's report and the report I gave, and I guess at the end of 2014, all of that ended up specifying a series of best practice, if you will, in terms of how to do that. And we had 1 year of special scope built in with the town's audit to take a look at that and just help us make sure that in fact had been implemented. And so the question that came up now all these years later was just how that was going. And so instead of thinking about whether we needed to increase our audit scope again to take a look at it, I thought what we'd do is simply ask you and the rest of the board and even administration about what you're doing now to provide against those things. So it could be simply how the management and oversight of the procedures with regard to collecting, managing, and reporting that data is going. the staff involved and how they're trained and how you ensure that they kind of know what they're doing. And then finally, the level of management review of all that, if you will, prior to submissions of any information or request for reimbursement for the state. And I ask that just in the spirit of we will certainly minimize problems going forward if all of that is to your satisfaction based on what was reported, not just by me, but was also in Sue Gamm's report. Any comments or perspectives on that?
Sure. I can give you some high level, and if the administration wants to provide any specifics, just let me know and I'll give you the mic. But I would say I feel confident in our practices and procedures. I would say we've probably improved upon them. We have hired someone specifically to deal with excess costs with an accounting background, and I do think this is a very tedious, specific job in the tracking and management. And I think actually the district has benefited greatly by actually finding areas of reimbursement that we weren't even applying for, because without taking away from the work that lots of other people had done in the past, this is a professional who really knew how to get down into some of this. I do think, and Mr. Feeney or Dr. Landon could speak to it, but the excess cost process, on top of having a professional on it, goes through both the review of the special education department and the finance department before it goes anywhere outside of the building. Building level, I know training memos and manuals are sent out to each school, SES facilitators at the elementary school, special ed department chairs at both the middle and the high school, including principals and assistant principals. So I think significant PD is done there. I think for anyone who watches our budget process, we have lots of questions around excess cost reimbursement that we push the board to make sure to the administration to push how they're coming up with their numbers and what their submissions are. Also, quarterly, as part of our goals and initiatives review, special education provides kind of where they are with their tracking and how those actual systems are working, and is open to board question or review. So from a high level, I think we have probably more oversight in review and people actually understanding what excess cost reimbursement is than ever before. But if there's any technical department level, the administration.
I just want to say that there's an extensive professional development program for our regular teachers and our special education teachers that has been implemented in the past few years to ensure that everybody is properly trained and understands all of the nuances of the special education statutory requirements. And we are in contact with the state education department on an annual basis for them to review what it is we have done since 2014 to ensure that we are in full compliance. And I'm very happy to say we are in full compliance, and the past is behind us.
And I mean,
we like to hear that.
Yeah, I mean, the only add I would say, and you well know this, that our audit also then goes to the state for review, and so.
Okay. Jayme, just on that point, Jayme, Rob, you guys had brought that up as part of the audit.
Yeah, I'll just comment on it, because just for the public's information, I'm sure the Board of Education and others were aware of it. We did do the audit, and we were asking, could we do a look back? Just as an assurance, good housekeeping, because it was never entirely clear when we uncovered some of the issues if the root cause was administrative, staffing, management, even at the State Department, in terms of some of the nature of their record keeping. But we agreed there was an additional and potentially significant additional cost for us to ask the auditor, William Shapiro, to go back and dig into that. But that's good for you to bring up.
Yeah, thank you. Francis.
I have a couple of questions on the school psychologists.
Sure.
You have an office space for them?
Yes.
Okay. And is this a phenomenon in the DIRG generally, to have kind of two per
So we
elementary
did ask the administration to provide kind of what are the solutions within the DIRG, and there are a variety of solutions within the DIRG. And so we asked why this model versus this model, and at some point we're happy to share that slide with you if it's informative to you. You know, some people employed a social worker instead of a psychologist. What the short answer, and I imagine will be a much longer answer as we have conversations, is that a psychologist is the most equipped to do the most things. So we get the most utility out of having a psychologist. They can test, they can counsel, they can, if needed, do reports to the state, versus the idea of what we do is we take our psychologist and we have them testing all day. And then kids in crisis might have a social worker, but the social worker can't necessarily sit in the PPT because the parents need a psychologist. So we pushed, and I think we're grateful to have such a supportive administration because we pushed pretty hard on why this model. And my feeling is we get the most utility out of hiring this one person, and I think that it will help backstop having to hire additional support staff because this person has a depth of knowledge and professional expertise that allows them to be a little more of a jack of all trades.
And whom do they report to?
So they would report in to, well, I guess it would depend on the situation. If they're dealing with an IEP matter, they would report in on a special education process. If they were dealing with a child who is in, let's say, a unique crisis that was non-special ed, it would be a team approach with the principal and the family.
Thanks.
I thought about a Board of Finance psychologist, but one wouldn't be enough.
We're not allowed to use them at the board level either.
Other questions for?
I have one, John.
I'm sorry, Jamie.
You know, I have the long view here that I always want to ask. Maybe I should direct this to Mike, but one of the drivers of the budget, and not that you avoided mentioning it, but one of the, and it's not subtle, one of the drivers is, in fact, the section changes year over year. And the report always includes those net changes by both school, location, and level of, K to 12. It's always an interesting analysis. So we're down one net section this year. What's it look like over 5 years?
I think, do you have that on that third page in the
I know
budget?
that, Mike, you're not going to give me that data right now, but the reason I'm raising it is one of the things that's, the tripwire here that we just simply are constrained by, and I'm not recommending it change annually, is that we hold fast to the fact that the school districts are held constant. And there may be a chronic issue that we're just avoiding, and the solution might be moving the school district. And again, I'm not suggesting, I can just imagine the hue and cry.
So you mean a redistrict internally? I know the rest of this room is...
I'm meaning if the data uncovered over a meaningful period more than the annual period, that
Yes.
there was a net increase in sections in, heaven forbid, homeschool, that you focus on, well, maybe that school district has just now grown faster. That it's, and there's lots of ways, and I know this is almost a multivariate equation because there's a lot of moving parts here. But the thing that's interesting is we don't have a Kensett, we don't have an Avalon. We may have some school enrollment changes if they do ultimately work with federal and the Palmers on that. That looks like about 100 right now, or 120 potential kids. I mean, there's no other possibility, and that could
So
be some time.
we don't have buildings with empty classrooms.
I understand that.
And so I think in terms of redistricting, it's not as if, as new apartment buildings come on, we certainly will have to look at where they're districted. And that might not necessarily be within the traditional geographical borders. Avalon is at Tokenique for that very reason. I don't, no one loves the redistricting word, but I don't think the board's afraid of looking at it. We
Good.
just have not seen, let's say, so much open space at homes, for instance, that it would say, well, okay, we could take this neighborhood and add it into homes.
I defer to you. It should be obvious that there was, your words, open space. So
Yeah.
deferring to you on that. I just don't want to.
I would love some open space.
I would put the redistricting thing on the table, but periodically is
Yeah.
all I'm saying.
I think as much as it would be a tough conversation, I have not seen anyone on board that would not put it on the table if
Good,
needed.
great.
Other questions? Paul?
With respect to health plan, Was any consideration given to going to the state plan?
I think internally, yes, at the board level, we did not hear it, but I kept asking Mr. Feeney if he would have good health numbers for me, and I think he has as good as he can, but I do think internally you all looked at, maybe looking at the state health plan.
We did. We used our broker to look at the state plan to see where we would match up. Right now, our plan is better than the state plan, not necessarily in benefits, but financially it's more beneficial in transitioning to the state plan. But we did look at that. We look at that every year, and it'd be interesting to see where it happens in the next couple of years.
Yes, it will.
Okay, other questions? Rob?
Just back to psychologist for a second. So it sounds like 4 more. It sounds like you got a floater right now that's going to the pain points, lack of a better word. It sounds like contractually you got to put 1 in, right? So we're adding another one for everyday items, it sounds like. Have we thought about how we want to operationally run that?
So we had a floater. We released the psychologist at Henley, and that floater was then deployed to Henley. So we no longer have a floater. We have 1 at every school.
1 in every, so now we'll have 2.
Yes.
And the current one stays with the contractual ones? Are we, so
No, so that was part of the discussion, that we wanted to make sure, well, the administration will find out how it works in totality, and they can deploy their staff as they want. So my hesitation is only as I'm not dictating how they deploy their staff. But we didn't think it was wise to have, let's say, a special education 504 psychologist and another one. We think, because a psychologist oftentimes is called into PPT. So if you only have 1, that person's always in meetings. From what we heard, the models that the administration could choose to deploy would be kind of a 50% caseload. 50% non-special ed children, 504 children, and 50% kind of what we say is general education children.
Great. Thanks.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Mrs. Ochman,
Yeah.
but also thank members of the Board of Education and the administration for coming by to provide the SOAR to us. The ball is obviously in our court, and we'll reach out with our questions as we start our own review, but we really appreciate not just tonight's presentation, but the thoroughness with which this was prepared, as it always is. So
Great.
thank you very much.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate
We
it.
look forward to working with you on it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next up, Mrs. Stevenson.
Good evening, everyone. I don't have a PowerPoint this evening, but I'll be happy to provide you with my prepared comments. And we're going to have a little open Darien tutorial at the end of my comments. So, good evening, Chairman Zagrodzky, Board of Finance members, fellow Board of Selectmen, colleagues, Board of Education, RTM members, and the public. We're grateful for the full engagement of the Finance and Budget Committee of the RTM during our process again this year. We valued your input. On behalf of my staff and our board, I'm pleased to remit to you the proposed Board of Selectmen budget, operating budget, and capital budget spending plan for fiscal year 2019-2020. This year's proposed budget can be described as a service-neutral budget, with the notable exceptions of the request to fund 3 additional civilian dispatchers and 1 additional Parks and Recreation laborer. In the numbers, the Board of Selectmen budget includes the following requests. $30.1 million for general operating, which is a $1.12 million increase over last year. That includes elements such as $332,000 for civilian dispatchers, $90,000 for a parks laborer, $88,000 for medical insurance. We had a 7.2% renewal this year, and $612,000 for other budgetary increases, which you will see in the details of our budget. It also includes a $3.82 million grant to the Darien Public Library. They came in with a 2.34% increase this year. The library continues to provide an exceptional budget, and we were pleased to support their grant request this year. Our capital requests total $3.856, and we have a series of items that we would like for you to consider bonding this year. We know that's in your purview, but let me offer a few recommendations. In total, we'd like you to consider $775,000 in bonding, $600,000 for the total cost of Highland Farms improvements, $30,000 to fund the additional funding for the natural gas conversion at the Norotan Fire Department, $50,000 additional funding for the town hall generator, which we hope to goodness actually gets installed this year. And $75,000 for town hall gym upgrades. And Kate, I added to this list $20,000 for repair to the front steps connecting Upper Town Hall to the Mather Center. We're asking you to consider a 10.878 debt service budget, which includes $4.1 million for the town, $6 million for the Board of Ed, and $737,000 for sewer debt. I know much of that is outside of all of our control, but I trust that you'll manage our bond funding appropriately. Should the Board of Finance consider bonding the items I just mentioned, the total Board of Selectmen operating and capital budget increase will be 2.53% over fiscal year 19. Certainly an increase over the budget reduction that we enjoyed last year, and I really want to thank you again for the efforts in last year's budget. We knew that that was a short one-time only window that really provided some much-needed taxpayer relief and certainly is welcome in light of many of the pressures that we're seeing right now. So this year's budget cycle is highlighted by a number of budgetary enhancements. We fully implemented the OpenGov or Open Darien software tools, which you'll see shortly. OpenGov process requires all departments to utilize a true zero-based budgeting process, resulting in each and every line item detailed and defended. On behalf of my board, I want to express our deep gratitude to our department heads for managing the OpenGov learning curve, and especially to Jen and Kate for their professional guidance along the way. We valued their input. Implementation of department-by-department performance measures, budget drivers, accomplishments, objectives, and a 5-year outlook. All this data can be found on the town website in several places. On the home page under News, for anybody that wants to plug in from home. In a very transparent and user-friendly way in the Open Darien section, linked from the home page, and we'll walk through that shortly. We have implemented 3 years of historic budget data this year, as well as adopted and revised current year budgets, and we added transfers for the current year. We have eliminated the Parks and Recreation contra account and moved all activity into the budget, showing expenses and revenues readily available to you to look at how much the Parks and Rec programming offsets the cost of delivering those services. And we consolidated certain fire department training and medical costs into the fire commission budget. Other spending highlights this year include a recommendation to add state educational cost-sharing grant revenue back into the budget. On this year's actuals and information that we've received from the governor's proposed budget, we feel comfortable asking to put that revenue back in the Board of Selectmen budget. We received $412,000 for the current fiscal year, and we are anticipated to receive $428,000 for fiscal year 20. While this may sound like very hopeful news, the rationale for asking to request that we put it back in the budget is to appropriately offset the proposed municipal contribution to the teacher pension sharing in the teacher's retirement system. Currently, the proposal is that the cities and towns will contribute 25% of normal costs. And for the town of Darien, the state has calculated that we pay our teachers 15% over the state average. We will be responsible for covering 100% of the delta of that cost contribution between the state average and what we pay our teachers. So for the coming year, we will be required to pay $445,000 to the teacher pension, and that will rise to $1.3 million in the state's fiscal year 2022. We've not included the TERS contribution in the Board of Selectmen spending plan, as the state budget has a very long way to go before ratification. We ask that the Board of Finance hold $445,000 in the Board of Finance contingency account for this payment if necessary. The net effect of the governor's budget and the teachers' retirement system contribution will reduce state funding to Darien from currently $897,000 to $448,000. So significant reduction in state aid to us. It would be prudent for the Board of Finance to consider that 100% of the normal cost, teacher pension cost, not including retirees, for Darien teacher pensions is approximately $5.2 million. And again, the state will be asking us to pay the delta between what we pay and the state average salaries. So it is conceivable that either this year or in years going forward, we could be looking at making teacher retirement system contributions somewhere between the 25% and 100% of the normal costs. So certainly appropriate to be mindful of that as we move forward. In our deliberations, the Board of Selectmen set service delivery priorities that resulted in a $1.6 million cut to the town administrator's proposed budget. Our budget prioritizes public safety in support of 3 civilian dispatchers. We've had this conversation for a number of years. This year, the hiring of the 3 additional professional telecommunicators will provide 24/7 coverage for the evening shift, and will bring our full complement of civilian dispatchers to 6. So the day shift and the evening shift will be covered by professional telecommunicators. The Board of Selectmen supports this request with the caveat that sworn personnel must be redeployed to the roles of Middlesex Middle School student resource officer and to providing a dedicated narcotics officer. It's our understanding that with your budget approval, a Middlesex Middle School SRO will be in place by July of 2019. We believe professional civilian telecommunicators provide an industry best practice dispatch service for our community. Should the state mandate the consolidation of public service answering points, or PSAPs, having civilians in that role will make for a much smoother transition than were we to continue with our current sworn officer in those roles. I would like to propose to you this evening a different funding model for the Darien High School and Middlesex Middle School SROs and potentially the school crossing guards. Currently, the town purchases information technology services from the Darien Public Schools, and this shared service model has served the town and taxpayers very well. I'd like for you to consider a similar model for other town or district-provided services. This will allow for a more appropriate and transparent cost accounting for these vital public safety measures in our schools. The safety of our children and financial support for these safety measures is the highest priority for our town. We support the reinstatement of the parks laborer position that was vacated when a personnel matter necessitated a shift of that position into the Department of Public Works area. We were able to make do with that reduced staff, but with the purchase of Highland Farms and the improvements underway at Short Lane, Parks and Rec labor staff has a critical need for that reinstatement of that laborer position. In addition, it would be appropriate to say that we support the continuation of that added position to the Public Works Department. We had a change in our facilities staff, and in order to maintain our public facilities in the manner that we feel appropriate, we would like to retain that individual in the Public Works maintenance staff. We did not support, we did not support accruing funds for the accrued leave redemptions in an effort to avoid taxing for expenditures beyond the current budget year. We strongly support reserving for capital equipment replacement, but we do not support reserving for future personnel-related expenses. We're requesting a modest increase in funding for the Blight Review Officer. When the Blight Ordinance was drafted, it assumed we might have about 12 cases every year. The Blight Review Officer has had to address 50 issues this year so far, with varying degrees of involvement. So we're asking for a small increase in the budget to add a couple hours to that work. We recommend that the Board of Finance review the revenue estimates from the interest income that's been provided by the town treasurer. Members of the RTM F&B committee have suggested that revenue projections may be understated given market conditions. We understand that our treasurer has a very specific limitation on how she can invest our money. She's the expert to whom you should refer. Capital budget highlights, in addition to those that I stated earlier, include full funding and proposed bonding for Highland Farms, approximately $600,000 for all of the improvements for the parking area and the ADA-compliant walking trail and egress and signage and the like. New sidewalk construction and rehabilitation, paving. The local match for the very much needed intersection improvements at West Avenue and Norotan Avenue. Fire apparatus replacement reserves, as always. Some new software, in-car camera system, building access system for the Darien Police Department. And an upgrade to the traffic preemption system for first responders. The police department has requested 4 marked and 1 unmarked police car. I heard Governor Lamont in his budget this year talk about state vehicles and extending the replacement schedule for those vehicles. So it might be time for us to take a look at that again. I know we've settled on a 3-year replacement schedule, but we have some pretty good cars right now, so it might be worth taking a fresh look from time to time. We were able to repurpose a police vehicle for the fire marshal's office, so we took that $60,000 request off the table. And we did not support the full funding for the short lane improvements. We know that there's a lot of investment being made in our Parks Department with the Pear Tree Beach project and the Highland Farms improvement, so we feel that the short lane improvements will have to wait for another day. Our department heads, town administrator, and board of selectmen were diligent in our interest to support projects, services, and capital expenditures that maintain a level of local service our taxpayers expect. As the realities of local impacts of the state's fiscal crisis come clearly in focus throughout the remainder of the legislative session, we acknowledge the difficult position the Board of Finance will face. We also recognize the need to continue to invest in our schools and look forward to bringing a well-planned Oxbridge Elementary School and Pear Tree Beach building project to the RTM in the near future. The Board of Selectmen does not consider impacts from the reinstatement of a homestead exemption, loss of motor vehicle revenue, which is approximately $4 million, the imposition of a 1 mil real property tax, or ramifications from school or municipal consolidations, and any new mandates or yet to be identified taxes on the wealthy. There's a plethora of these proposals gaining traction with state leadership, but it's too soon to reflect those in our budget. We're here to help inform any decisions that need to be made in that regard. To assist us with this task, we're working to develop a tax calculator that will give us the impacts to homeowners on the various proposals, specific to individual property owners. When this tool is refined and we have more clarity on state policy direction, we'll make the tax calculator available to the public. So you'll be able to plug in your own values and be able to see how those changes will affect the taxes that you'll pay. Right now, sort of broad brush, the impacts we know will in fact be significant. We took a crack at looking at an average home value, and some of the proposals, not including the homestead exemption, would raise the taxes owed somewhere between $1,600 and $1,700 per year. So now let's take a moment to get acquainted with the OpenGov program. So for anybody that wants to test this out, you go to the town website on the home page and you find the Open Darien icon. And when you click on that, you'll see a variety of different reports that Jen and Kate have been working on. So, Kate, would you go to, let's see if we can go to the budget in total, the total Board of Selectmen proposed budget. So pie charts are really fun and very colorful, but I like the bar graphs because, and you can toggle between the different visual icons up on the top right to format it in a way that's meaningful to you. I like the bar graphs because it shows year over year very well. So if you could do that for me, Kate. And then you'll see a series of departments down on the right-hand side. So let's just go into the police department, protective and emergency services. Now we can go into police services. We can dig a little deeper. And one of my favorites to talk about is, let's check out animal control. So animal control is one area that I have often talked about as potential service that might be ripe for regionalizing. So as we look at this budget, if you just move the cursor over the bars, you can see that our animal control officer costs us in 2018-19 about $80,600. So this will be a great tool for us to really look at the year over year. Number one, I think it's super important to be able to see the changes year over year, but to also make determinations on how much time you want to spend really thinking of new ways to deliver services that are generally pretty cost effective. And I know the Board of Finance talks about that often. Let's look at the big budget drivers, not some of the smaller ones. So in addition, let's look at, I think we can get back to the school crossing guards. So again, a pretty stable budget, $66,292. So this would be a very useful tool if we begin the discussions about different ways to account for certain costs between the town and the Board of Education. Probably one that everybody is very interested in is general government pension costs. So what I find interesting about this is, I think that the town has done a very good job of being able to manage year over year the cost of our pension system through the hard work of our negotiating teams and modest changes to the pension systems. So we have department by department granular detail in here for all of the town budget. We also have project-specific information. So Kate, if you wouldn't mind going to the town garage. This is actually almost like social media. You can sort of lose yourself in this for hours on end. But it's really interesting. And what I'd like to ask of the Board of Finance and everyone here who's interested, if there are specific reports that you would like to see, and you'd always like to see them, we can create them and have them linked right here. So here you go. We see what we appropriated for our project, what is left unspent, and then we can build into this program as much detail as we want project by project, and we anticipate being able to utilize this tool for all of our building projects going forward. We have the cafeteria loaded in here. We're going to be putting Oxford Elementary School and Pear Tree Beach in here. And so that's just a very general overview of the power of this tool. It's very user-friendly. I can use it. It's great. All the data is loaded in from the Munis system. So literally, you can go in from day to day and see real-time budgetary impacts. So I want to thank you very much for allowing the town to invest in this tool. John, I want to thank you for your due diligence in visiting the OpenGov company out in California a couple years ago. And again, I want to thank Jen and Kate. There has been a significant learning curve, But we've also been able to identify areas where our staff can use some professional development around building these zero-based budgets year over year, which I think is exceptional. So thank you very much. And with that, I will take any of your questions.
I'm hoping that the bright, vibrant colors will have a hypnotic effect on the Board of Education and that they'll want to adopt this system. Just kidding. Okay, questions for Mrs. Stevenson from any of you?
Could you just elaborate for a minute on what you were talking about on the shared services and the IT model and
Sure.
how that went?
Yes. So the municipal side of town government purchases IT services from the Board of Education or from the administration. And, it's been a very successful model. We share central IT administration, all of the software upgrades, our servers, our platforms, moving us to the cloud. We have an individual who's dedicated to working for the town. So as I look at the other services that have traditionally been embedded in the Board of Selectmen's budget, i.e. the high school SRO, soon to be hopefully the middle school SRO, and school crossing guards, those services exist for the benefit of students in the school district. So it really is just a way of more accurately reflecting the service. Thinking about SRO specifically, I would recommend that we do a very careful analysis that the Board of Ed would only purchase a certain amount of SRO time, because as you know, the SROs are available to do general policing work. They're available in hours outside of the school to do regular police work. So it would be a percentage of the SRO's time. So, for your consideration.
So Jimmy, when on the IT services that you purchased from the board, are all those employees employed by the Board of Ed?
Yes.
And so how do you allocate, like how much are you paying? Is it a certain time, number of computers, users? Like how's that time allocated between the two?
We pay 100% of one person.
Yep.
And then we pay a specific percentage of the other employees. It was based on the assumption of how much time we use of each of those employees. So it ranges from anywhere from 10% to 25% of the other employees.
But those employees still report into the Board of Ed?
Yes.
Correct.
Okay,
Yes.
the administration.
Correct.
And they did the Open Gov, was that part of that IT effort?
No, I don't. That was very independent.
Okay.
I mean, they support. They're They're really skilled
I'm just
individuals.
curious.
So if we need them, they're there.
Thanks. Yeah.
Could you expand briefly on just where we are over time with the civilian dispatch program? I seem to recall a number of 9 when we had
Sure.
discussed this a while back, and so we've
Yes.
gone to 3. Now we've got 6 covering day and night shifts. What's next with that plan?
Well, we take those requests every year as they come. I think that the Board of Selectmen has, I hope, sent a clear message to the police administration and the police commission that we will have to think long and hard about civilianizing the overnight shift. But we see the value of the 6 civilians that make up in the day and evening shift. It allows the administration to craft the schedules so that they can actually pull individuals out of the sworn staff and dedicate them to the SRO and narcotics. So, I was not supportive of moving forward the 3 that we're asking for this year, but I think that we're so committed to safety in our schools that the middle school SRO is probably the number 1 priority for me in terms of public safety. And narcotics, in addition, I don't know if you read the article recently about the fentanyl bust in Westchester County that I think it had a market value of $2 million and had the capability of killing 1 million people. So this is the drug traffic that's moving up and down the I-95, Merritt Parkway, and Metro North Corridor. So we've had enough conversations with the chief and his staff to understand the absolute necessity of dedicating someone to investigating narcotics cases.
John, I'll just comment. We had a session with Jen and Kate, Rob and I. We haven't done the police yet. I'm not sure we're actually going to go over this year. We may just Vimeo it. But I think the issue, which is really important, that should be emphasized, is the flexibility within the contract for minimum staffing that is now available, with the contract on the sworn officers being the constraint. And now we just have more bodies that can fill in even with sick time. So that's a big deal, actually. And it should inure to our benefit on overtime as well, although that's speculation, but it's likely that it will. So, I mean, there's the, and you know, I don't want to lionize Chief Lavello, but he did such a great job. But intuitively, ask yourselves, you know, the unit of measure being crime.
Okay.
Do we have more crime? Is crime more intense? Is there more of it? I think intuitively we would say yes. And we've had a fixed sworn officer complement for 17 years or something like that. So, you know, this is I think this is a good, some of the moves are good moves, notwithstanding the fact, John, as you've made it very clear, these are full-time positions that have long-term real impact. But
I'll make two comments. I'll reframe your comment, Jayme, and say, while I believe that regionally there is more crime, the reason why Darien continues to be one of the safest communities to live is because of the excellent law enforcement staff that we have. So we want to make sure that we continue to invest in that. It's critically important to supporting our home values at a time when home values are under tremendous pressure. And also to not lose sight of the fact that professional telecommunicators deliver the service in a very high quality and very consistent manner. I'm not disparaging our sworn officers, but there can be differences between individual to individual. Professional telecommunicators have a certain standard of training and excellence that I believe our community deserves.
yeah, and I want to put another action. I just this is you know I love a story, but a story from many years ago. When I was in the state senate, we had an interstate highway running through the district, really right through the middle of it, I-84. And I always remember the state police coaching us, just this whole notion, and here we sit with, as you commented, these corridors. Those corridors, those road systems were referred to as sewers, open sewers. And they go right through our town. And that has an indirect impact on crime in town to some degree that we have to enforce.
Absolutely.
So it's a reality of where we are. It's our location reality.
I'll take a moment for a public service announcement and remind everyone to please lock your cars. Happy to answer
John, I have
any.
one more comment.
Did you have a comment?
Yeah,
Kate?
John, if I could just add on your original question about the original number was 9. I think before we go beyond the proposed 6, we also have to answer the question of, do we believe we should have 2 on the overnight shift? The 6 gets us 2 dispatchers 24/7 during the days and the evenings, where we have a need for 2 bodies answering the phones. The question, before we think about adding more, we should consider, do we need 1 or 2 on that shift? Because then you determine what the number might be.
Kate, can you recount the impact per shift? One was really lighter. What, if the 3 8 hours are looked at, this 11 to 7 is quite significantly lower.
Right.
Yes, the daytime shift has the greatest concentration of call volume, followed by evening and then overnight.
But it's a big drop off the third
Yes.
overnight shift.
I don't have the
Which is
numbers.
maybe where there's a
But that would have to be a conversation before you even go to, do we add more civilians?
Jamie.
one comment on the capital budget side.
Yes.
I'm not sure it was presented, and I'm looking at Jennifer and Kate perhaps as to how we present it. But we've been meeting over the last couple of years on policy issues that are we think, drivers. the budget process. And we, with Jim Palin's very capable involvement, we've really recalculated our debt policy to a degree that we're looking at something that is a key measure. For instance, I think we've concluded that a $100 million constraint on total outstanding indebtedness is random. I mean, it's nice. It's a nice thing, but it's pretty random. But a couple of other things that would be more constant measures, and I can't say I can remember all of them, but two that come to mind were debt per capita. Obviously, that's a pretty simple equation. And debt service as a percentage of the budget.
Sure.
And if we look at those standards and, maintain some constraints, I think we would say, I'm speaking for myself, I'm not speaking for the Board of Finance, that there's a great deal of elasticity in terms of our fiscal capacity to service certain capital items that are legitimate items. I've said this year and year and year. I've said this to the Board of Education. I'm not suggesting we spend like drunken sailors, but that we queue up our hard assets for their replacement, if necessary, and not because we're in a low interest rate environment. And I'm not predicting where the interest rate environment. It's good balance sheet management. And in some ways, I think we've delayed some things. And I'm directing these comments to the Board of Education. Don't be shy about running the schools up to us and suggesting where you can accelerate some of those. So a good debt policy, I think we've got some capacity is what I'm getting at. I think if we look at those two measures within which we can manage to a prudent fiscal debt policy. And I just commend you, and again, I'm looking at the Board of Education, to consider that. Accelerate projects, think about those. We've got the capacity.
I appreciate that, and I really appreciate that the Board of Finance is looking at the policy. Always good to have a policy, but truth be told, my feeling on that is a policy has to be dynamic, and you have to be able to be nimble with the policy, especially in times when there's so many pressures on the taxpayers, where just because you feel like you have debt capacity, we have to remember the taxpayers' ability to pay. And we've done some analysis in WestCog, really interesting analysis. The state of Connecticut uses equalized net grand list as one of their metrics, and we've sort of turned that around, and we've looked at incomes, and incomes in relation to the percentage of cost of spend on your housing. And it comes up with a very interesting result. So I just encourage you to keep in mind that while on a spreadsheet it looks like we have capacity, please consider the dynamics of things that might be outside our control or pressures on our taxpayers that we should always be mindful of.
Other questions for Mrs. Stevenson?
I guess one question, I think the number I wrote down is $400,000 in terms of the contribution for the portion of the teacher pension plan,
Yes.
that it represents how far we are above the state average. I think you said 15%.
15%.
Did you look back, how has that trended over the past 5 or 10 years in terms of where our salaries and have been relative to the state? And how should we think about that going forward?
I haven't been provided with that analysis, but I would think that could be requested of the Board of Education.
We could provide it. It hasn't been requested of us either, so we could provide it. The important thing to note, I would say, on teacher salaries, and why Jamie will correctly tell you that the state isn't looking at what you do internally within your DIRC.
Right.
We certainly are quite conservative on our salaries with our DIRC, which sometimes makes it hard to attract teachers. Greenwich and Westport, from a salary point of view, are more attractive. So this new metric from the state will stress us in one way, and what we pay our teachers currently stresses us in another way. So it is kind of a generalized number, but I think inside the DIRC we are low. But we could look at
But I think it's something that'll affect us, just given the cost of living and what it costs to attract teachers
Yeah, sure.
to pay them in this area.
Yep.
It's not just what we pay them, it's what their costs are as well. And
Yeah.
I don't feel like that necessarily.
Well, I agree with you,
Reflects-
and when the governor was here for a visit, we talked about that very topic, that the policy as we see it right now coming from leadership doesn't consider any regional cost of living analysis whatsoever, and made him very well aware that in order to incent high-quality teachers to want to drive an hour on the Merritt Parkway or I-95 or afford the cost of a train, we do have to pay our teachers more. The overall cost of their life when they're here in Darien, if they live here, it's even higher. But those things really need to be analyzed in a more detailed way to compare apples to apples. I don't think it's fair to compare what we pay a teacher in Darien to what they pay a teacher in Vernon, for example.
So, Jim, you were wondering whether that percentage has gone from like 12 to 15 over,
And
say,
whether it would suggest that it's going to continue to move
Yeah,
from
yeah.
15
Just trying to
to
understand.
20, because that affects sort of what we contribute.
This
So-
is the first year that it's come up,
Yep.
and it's only come up because of the state requirement. Not that the information is not available, I'm sure you can get it, but
Yep. You
Yeah, I know we've always
the
talked-
fundamental concept, obviously, is that those towns like ours that pay our teachers more than the state average, it's perceived that we carry a disproportionate burden of the teacher pension retirement system. So I understand their I'll say their shallow logic on that, but it requires a much deeper analysis, in my opinion.
So I would just add, and I'm sorry, I'm not up there, but.
I don't think they can hear you either. I got
So,
a complaint about that.
Just looking at teacher salaries and pensions, I think on all these bill proposals, it's going to be incumbent upon us to see that while they're proposals, they really need some more details and how they affect towns like ours. And I'm sure the quiet corner will have proposals on how it affects theirs, but it will certainly be incumbent upon us to share that information as we both try to balance budgets going forward.
And Tara, is that for both administration and teachers? Do they look at both of them and how they are relative to?
Currently, as I understand it, it's only teachers, but
That's my understanding as well, but certainly a point to clarify.
Because that could be something to think about in terms of
yes.
how you classify like a curriculum coordinator, whether it's a teacher or whether it's an administrator.
Part of that is how the union defines it. So, I mean, this is the problem when you have some of these big new ideas. I maybe wouldn't call it shallow, but I would say some of these new ideas need to be flushed out much more so that we know how to apply them, and kind of as town leaders, we know how to go forward.
I just want to add one thing that most people don't know, and that is that teachers pay 7.5% of their salary to the pension system, the teacher retirement system. So it's just something that I think everybody needs to understand, that it's not, no matter what happens in the future, teachers are paying into that system to help keep it viable.
But they do not, they're not eligible for Social Security, so.
Other questions from
Yeah.
Mrs. Stevenson?
Just a quick one, Jamie or Kate. So this number's going from 445 to 1.3 million in 2
Yep.
years. What's driving the increase? Is it staying at 15% or is that rate going up?
No.
They're phasing in the number
That's
over
the
3
ramp.
years.
The ramp up to 25% plus the
Sounds like the
15%
first year
kicker.
is
Yeah, it's a
15.
3-year, it's a
15%,
3-year ramp up.
Okay.
Other questions? I guess my only concluding comment, other than to say thank you, but comment on both these budgets. One thing that you've noticed is that the Board of Education had a 92% fixed component to it, and the Board of Selectmen budget, as it has been for many years, is quite lean and well thought through, and we've been through this for a very long time. That's a good thing for the town, but one of the things that it doesn't do is really provide us a lot of flexibility, either with those two boards or with this board, to make a whole lot of changes, right? You either can't make the changes because they are in fact fixed, or making any change really results in service level cuts or changes to the way the town is managed that just nobody's going to be supportive of. And so I love it to be able to say that even in my judgment, these are lean and well-managed budgets, but it does mean that as these costs are layered in from the state, that it's going to make it more expensive to live here. There's just no doubt about it. And so I think it's important that we have a tax calculator like that everyone can take a look at and see what the impact of certain things are. For my own purposes, which we'll of course make public as well, and we'll coordinate. I don't want to have redundant effort. But I think it's also important to take a look at some of these changes and then project them over the next 5 to 10 years, because we are looking at a 5 to 10 year time horizon to get these problems solved. And as I've said publicly, nothing that I've seen in terms of what's proposed by the state and any numbers that have been thrown around, even every number that's been thrown around, gets anywhere close to solving these problems. Let me be clear about that. This is not close to being able to solve the problems that we're looking at the state level and turn things around as a financial matter for the state. So I think it's going to be very important that as a town, we stay pretty eyes open about these realities, and that we also have the mechanisms in front of us to where we can look at proposals and then project them out over some period of time so that we all know just how much this is going to cost. Because I think even with those costs, unfortunately, the answer is probably going to be, we're going to have to pay that, and we still want all the services here, right? Because if you think about it, it's the quality of schools, it's the quality of life in this town, it's the services that are provided by the town, it's all those things, irrespective of what happens in Hartford. That's why we're all here, and that's why we would want to continue to live here. So I would applaud both boards for your efforts to be not just fiscally responsible with your budgets, but to be transparent like you are right now and as you've been in this presentation. But we will try to supplement that with a realistic view and helpful mechanism to be able to look at what's being considered by the state so that we can have a long-term view of just how costly this is going to be. But I just want everybody here and everybody watching to be aware of that we're going to look at it closely, but do not have any illusions about how expensive this could potentially get. You should be ready for that. This is the formal time in the year when we take the budgets that have been voted on by these boards and start our own process. I know F&B has already started to work on it to some degree. We're going to coordinate very closely with them. And we are changing our process to where we will try to go directly to Kate and the Board of Selectmen with any questions that we have, rather than type the time of the department heads. I know they very much regret that. If they really would like to hear from us, I'm sure we could work out a schedule for that. But I kudos to the Board of Selectmen and to Kate for pushing us along to do that. I think it'll make the process more efficient, but it won't certainly affect our oversight or the role that we play in this process. So I think it's a win on both sides. So we will kick that off and use the next month or so to work through our process and look to have a vote to set the mill rate. I think it's the second week in April when we do all that. So does anyone else have any questions, or anyone from the audience have any questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much to both boards. We appreciate it. And motion to adjourn. Paul, second. Rob, we stand adjourned. Thank you.